Welcome to Trench Diaries. This is The Blond Knight of Germany, Chapter 16, War Criminal. Perhaps man's history is simpler than we think. It is summed up in proclaiming the right and doing the wrong. Clemenceau. In a campaign to break Erich Hartmann, launched in 1947, the NKVD interrupted his mail both ways as a primary tactic. Scraps of news taken from Usch's steady stream of letters to Erich were fed to him in a heartless, Pavlovian effort to make him obey. He was given just enough information from home to arouse almost unendurable cravings for human contact. Everything else was withheld. This cruel campaign lasted 2 years. The NKVD wanted Erich Hartmann to sign written statements confessing to a range of war crimes. The NKVD had, of course, itself composed these confessions and manufactured all the details. The irrelevancy of Erich's forced confession to such fictional crimes never impressed itself on his tormentors. Obsessed, as all bureaucrats are, by signed, completed forms and perfect documentation, validity or truth of their content was of no significance to the NKVD. Irrational, like all psychopaths, they preferred to have him sign a lie than to hear him tell the truth. All possible pressure was exerted on Erich, but he fought back and managed to keep his cowardly foes at bay for 2 years. The man who tries to meet irrational individuals with rational arguments is doomed to fail in his quest for reason. The perverse world they inhabit is upside down and back to front, a negative of the world of normal men. In Erich Hartmann's own words, "The Russians, by which I mean the NKVD psychopaths, have a mentality that no rational Western-educated individual can comprehend. You can kill your father there and confess it to the police, and they may confine you for 2 years. If you steal something, that is inconsequential. The Russians laugh if you don't steal something. But if you say that the American Chevrolet is better than the Russian Ziz car, then you will get 25 years in jail. If you say Stalin or Khrushchev or Brezhnev is a bad leader, whichever one of them happens to be leading Russia at the time, then they will hang you or give you life imprisonment." Many of our prison mates were Russian citizens who had violated Courant Red dogma. They were men with gumption and reason, but the NKVD ensured that they stayed out of circulation. The final 9 months of the NKVD's campaign to break him saw him spending most of his time in the bunker. He was at Camp Kutenikovo in the Donetsk Basin, less than a mile from the airstrip from which the 7th Squadron of the 3rd JG-52 had operated in the summer of 1943. He had taken off from the Kutenikovo airfield in the morning that he fell into the hands of the Russians and later made good his escape. In 1949, there would be no escape. He was willing to die in Kutenikovo if necessary, rather than surrender. He crowned his resistance with a hunger strike, rejecting even a handful of bread necessary each day to sustain life. He fully intended to commit suicide in this way if he was forced to, and while he was not yet 28 years old, his physical power was at an end. The Russians let him go 3 full days without food or water. On the 4th morning, the door of the bunker burst open and 2 hulking guards hustled him out of the dungeons and into the office of the camp doctor. In his spare surgery, the Russian medic was waiting with an array of bottles and tubes on a table. The doctor nodded to the guards. Massive muscles seized the emaciated Erich and pinned his arms to his sides. He was dragged to a cot on one side of the surgery. Kicking his legs from under him, the guards pinioned his limbs as he lay prostrate. He was powerless. The doctor walked over impassively and, forcing a tube into Erich's mouth, connected the other end to a plastic bladder full of yellow liquid. The doctor squeezed the bladder, and Erich felt a sweet and sickly flood in his mouth. Spitting and gulping, he tried to get rid of the tube. Overpowered at every move by the guards, Erich began swallowing the mixture to avoid strangulation. The doctor kept pressing the bladder. "Eggs and sugar, Hartmann," said the doctor. "You must eat. The commissar has ordered it." The ruthless cycle of force feeding and confinement in the bunker continued for a further 27 days. At the end of this time, Erich felt a hopeless, moribund wreck. He had abandoned struggling with the guards, but they continued to pinion him solidly at every feeding. On the 27th day, The NKVD commissar visited him in his dank hole. Erich, what are you doing? He cajoled. You are such a young man, don't starve here. If we get the order from Moscow, we will kill you. Just shoot you down. Understand? But we have the order that you are to live, and so you will live, even if we have to force you to live as we have been doing. Erich stared groggily into the face of the Russian. His body felt wasted to a wraith. Malevolent and heavy, the commissar's countenance swam before him in a fog. The coaxing voice came floating again through the cloying mist of unconsciousness, and this time his tormentor was applying the ultimate pressure. Look, Erich, look here. I have 5 letters from your wife, Usch. 5 of them. They will be full of interest for you, with all kinds of news about your home and family. All you have to do is stop this starving, and you will get these letters. Erich peered at the array of letters the commissar was holding in his hand like a royal flush in a poker game. Erich could see the Stuttgart postmark. Yes, and that was the handwriting of his beloved Usch. For 2 years he had heard nothing. Now here were 5 more links with the human world being dangled before him. In the dank and wretched bunker at Kutenikovo, which thousands of Germans had cursed 1,000 different ways, Erich felt a consuming void inside himself grow and swell and pulsate until it burst over him in a black tide. There, at that moment, in that hellhole in the earth, forsaken by all but his Usch, Erich knew he had come to the end of his rope. His tortured soul ached in his wasted body. Resistance was ended, and he knew it. He had to have those letters no matter what the cost. 2 years, God in heaven, was there no mercy? He resolved that, beaten as he was, he would deny the commissar the pleasure of seeing him crack. Summoning all his remaining strength, he spat out his answers. I will not sign your damned paper, and I will not eat. Gaping in disbelief at the shriveled skeleton still snarling defiance, the commissar straightened up. Stuffing Usch's letters in his pocket, he turned and stumped out, cursing. But the brave man in the bunker knew that he had shot his bolt. Erich sank back on the cold ground in the bunker, his energy and spirit spent. He found himself sobbing softly in the darkness. If he needed any confirmation that he had reached the end, the involuntary sobbing was proof enough. Yet, through the blackness of his despair, the spirit still struggled bravely. For 2 more nights and days he continued to resist the now ever-present impulse to surrender. He found himself inwardly glad when they dragged him out for oral injections of milk, sugar, and eggs. In the blackness of the bunker, the commissar's malignant face swam before his mind's eye, standing out among a covey of taunting phantoms that came hurtling up from his subconscious. Every NKVD bully, persuader, or persecutor that he had ever resisted in Russia took part in the parade of images that crossed his mind. He relived the horror of the rape pogrom in the meadow. The humid death stench in the Kirov swamp camp seemed again to pervade his being in nauseating waves. Time after time in his mind he smashed the chair down on the head of the bullying Russian lieutenant. Commissars and faceless phantoms in NKVD uniforms swirled before him and with accusing fingers bawled, "Bunker, bunker, bunker, 21 days, 40 days, 60 days, bunker, bunker, bunker." When at length the phantasmagoria dissolved and departed, he found his brain strangely purged and his thinking quick, quiet, and cool. He knew now that he must eat to save himself. His prior resolve to kill himself by starvation was an aberration. He must not die in Russia and leave his beloved Usch alone in the world. She was waiting, he must not fail her. Somehow, by some means divine or human, he would return home. He realized that if he died, he would be of no use to anyone, but alive, he could keep hope burning for others as well as for himself. As in his combat days, he began quietly talking to himself. Erich, you first must conquer your main enemy, hunger. Get something to eat, no matter what you have to do. Then, by God, you get your hands on those letters and read them before you die of curiosity. Then you will see life differently. As though responding telepathically to the trend of Erich's thoughts, the bunker door swung open. The 2 hulking guards again stood ready to escort him to the surgery. With a Herculean effort, he stood up and walked shakily out of the bunker. His legs felt like rubber. The guards shoved him into the surgery, ready for another pinioning prior to force-feeding him. Weakly, he waved the guards away. I will eat. I will eat on my own. I give up my hunger strike. The Soviet doctor looked at him in surprise. Then an oily smile of satisfaction spread over the Russian's face. He offered Erich a cigarette. Good. You will eat. I will tell the commissar. The guards will take you now to the commissar's office. The doctor picked up the feeding tube and bladder, looked at them wryly, then let them fall back on the desk. This is a hell of a way to eat, Hartmann, he said. I am glad you finally decided to listen to reason. Erich went stumbling shakily out of the surgery, guards at his elbows, and made his way to the commissar's room. The 70-yard walk pushed him to his absolute physical limit. Sweating profusely, trembling violently and near collapse, he went reeling into the commissar's office and slumped down in a chair. A guard went to the kitchen and brought him back some bread on a tin plate. Lunging into the stale bread, Erich clawed it into lumps and ate voraciously. A long draught from a cup of soup washed down the bread, although his hands were trembling so much he could hardly hold the mug. Never had food tasted so good, even if it was little more than hog fodder. A feeling of increasing solidity in his belly ached like an anchor, and soon his head stopped spinning and the trembling abated in his limbs. Strength came seeping back. He quietly swore to himself that he would never again embark on such a damned fool thing as a hunger strike. A bullet in the heart would be better. The commissar brought him his 5 letters from Usch. He ripped the envelopes open and fell on the pages of writing as avidly as he had fallen on the dry bread. Usch was well. Wonderful. Details of home surged into him like adrenaline. Flowers in bloom, a band concert in town, Erich's mother and father were well, a new dress. The trivia of everyday German life throbbed with interest. He pored over the letters like an archaeologist absorbed with writings exhumed from some ancient pyramid. Life could be bearable again, now that he knew Usch was safe and the home front was secure. The news put more vitality into him than the food. He felt like a new man, ready for anything. As Erich finished reading the 5 letters for the 3rd time, a shadow came between the paper and the small window. The commissar's somber bulk intruded on his paradise. The Russian drew a paper from his pocket and set it in front of Erich together with a pen. "Here's what you have to sign," he said. Erich glanced at the usual juvenile summary of alleged charges to which he would be pleading guilty by signing the document. He had murdered women and children, destroyed property, and inflicted grievous material losses on the Soviet Union. The Blond Knight had recovered enough of his fire to fight again. If he knew Usch was fine, he could stand anything. He pushed the paper back at the NKVD man. "I've read my letters, and therefore it is now not necessary for me to confess to these lies," he said. The Russian's face dropped. "You mean you now refuse to sign after we have fed you and saved you from suicide?" "I mean only that I will not sign your paper. It is not even written in my language. Besides, I've never killed women and children in my life, not even in war. I am not ashamed of having been a soldier of my country." "I warn you, Hartmann, this will mean severe punishment for you. You will never be released." Erich looked directly into the NKVD man's shifty eyes. "You've been saying the same thing to me for years. You violate even the commandments of your own god hero Lenin. He said that any nation retaining war prisoners more than 6 months after the war was uncivilized. You keep me here in Russia as a slave for 5 years and want me to confess to crimes that your NKVD propagandists have invented. No, I will not sign your damned paper." Bulging with fury, the commissar snatched up the paper. "You will pay for this dishonor," he barked, and flung out of the room red with rage. Erich read his letters again and basked in the sweetness of news from home. He didn't care if they shot him down, let them. Today, the letters were his world, and it sang with vitalizing harmony. In the ensuing days, it was obvious that the Russians were glad he had quit his hunger strike. Erich kept after the food and began to regain a little of the weight he had lost. He began feeling stronger and could soon walk around without fear of collapse. The NKVD left him alone until he was clearly out of danger. Then they began another approach. Guards took him to the commissar's office, then left him alone with his adversary. The Russian offered him a cigarette. Erich took the cigarette, lit it, and sat down in the stiff-backed chair to which the commissar waved him. "Erich, we've been reviewing your case. Yes, we have reviewed it quite thoroughly, and as a result, we have reached some new opinions about you." Erich dragged quietly on his cigarette and looked back evenly at the Kommissar, at his wavering eyes and fidgety hands. When these NKVD types called him Erich, he always got a bad feeling in his backside, like having an enemy on his tail during the war. He waited for the Russian to commit himself. "We are exceedingly sorry, of course, to know that your young son died in Germany. Bad luck. Very bad luck indeed, Erich. Perhaps if the Russian government had allowed his father to go home and take care of him, he would be alive today." Erich's reply was quietly spoken, but the Commissar's obvious and immediate discomfort told Erich that the Russian knew he had used the wrong ploy in attempting to gain his prisoner's confidence. The Commissar took another tack. "Erich, you're barely 28 years old. You're so young. Really, you were much too young in wartime to have been a fascist. You were caught up in the war and forced to fight. I did my duty as a soldier, nothing more. Of course, and now we have another soldier's job for you, one that would help you blot out the past. It would allow you to go home to your family." Erich's heart leapt. Home, that magnificent, incomparable word. "What kind of job do you have in mind for me?" said Erich. The Commissar leaned forward, encouraged by this arousal of his prisoner's interest. "The Soviet Union is supporting the development of a modern air force for the East German People's Republic. We are supplying the latest Soviet jet fighters, but we have many difficulties." "And where do I fit in with all this?" "Erich, our major difficulty is in finding experienced leaders around whom this new air force can be built. You follow me?" Erich nodded. "We know your record as a fighter pilot, of course, and we know from your prison history that you are a leader, even if in here you were a ringleader, eh?" The Russian laughed nervously as his clumsy attempt at humor failed to evoke a response for Erich. The blond knight's face remained expressionless, his gaze steady. "We need you for the East German Air Force, Erich. We will prepare you for this job immediately, take you out of this prison and up to Moscow for schooling. You'd like that. Then you can decide what you want to do, whether to work in the East German Air Force as an officer or on the political side of the Air Force organization. But you must work for us." Ending his pitch with hope in his eyes and anticipation written all over his face, the Russian officer looked at Erich. The blond knight slowly shook his head. The Commissar's face straightened. "You don't like this proposal?" he said. "Before we can talk about any kind of job at all, flying, consulting, political or whatever, you must first send me out as a free man to my family in the West." The Russian looked downcast. Erich further depressed him. "After I am at home in the West, you can make me a normal contract offer, a business deal such as people sign every day all over the world. If I like your offer and if I choose to accept, then I will come back and work with you in accordance with the contract. But if you put me to work, or try to put me to work, under coercion of any kind, then I will resist to my dying gasp." The Commissar shook his head sadly. "I'm sorry you feel this way, Erich, because it means that you can never again see your family." The Commissar's mournful expression was almost too good to be true. Erich half expected the Russian to burst into tears. His hopes of winning Erich over had obviously been so high. The Russian pressed a button on his desk, and 2 guards came clumping back into the room. In Russian, he ordered the prisoner taken back to barracks. As Erich was walking out through the door, the Commissar ended the interview more typically of the NKVD with a threat. "This time, you fascist bandit, you are really going to regret not working with us." Erich immediately felt more comfortable. When the NKVD called him a fascist bandit or a capitalist murderer, he knew he was on the right track. That was the NKVD in its true form. When they told him he was a nice young fellow and called him Erich and offered him cigarettes, he had learned to beware. Shortly afterward, massive shipments of German prisoners from home were begun. There were 1,400 German soldiers in Kotainikovo with Erich, and within a few weeks more than 2/3 of them were repatriated. True to their threat, the NKVD excluded Erich from the repatriation groups. Glad outwardly to see so many young men going home, he ached inwardly that he was not among them. He soon found out why. A few days after the last big draft of prisoners was moved out, the Commissar stalked into the barracks with a detachment of armed guards. A sergeant bawled for silence. The Commissar stood up on a bench and began reading a Soviet government proclamation. There were reams of polemic allegations concerning the brutal murder of Russian women and children, destruction of Soviet property, and other familiar Ehrenburg-style rantings of the propagandists. Then the Commissar began reeling off a long list of names. Erich Hartmann, Major, German Air Force, was among them. Then came the bomb. All the above-mentioned German prisoners of war are, as of this date, by order of the Soviet government and the verdict of its judiciary, convicted as war criminals. As war criminals, these prisoners will hereinafter be deprived of the protection of the Geneva Convention and the International Red Cross and will henceforth be treated as criminals under Soviet law. All the above war criminals are hereby sentenced to 25 years of hard labor. A roar of dismay went up from the prisoners. A menacing movement toward the Commissar was arrested by the cocked rifles of the guards. The sergeant bellowed for silence. The Commissar resumed. War criminals will receive formal documentation of charges against them on an individual basis in the next few days. That is all. The Commissar's threat to Erich had not been empty. In the ensuing weeks, the prisoners were paraded before a Soviet war judge and presented with lists of the charges against them. Erich's name was called, and he was marched with 4 other war criminals to a ramshackle wooden building outside the camp gates. A huge Soviet flag hung limply over the doorway, and a sentry went through the business of inspecting the passes of the guards and prisoners. In the so-called courtroom, behind a rough wooden desk, sat the Russian war judge, a slab-faced man with thinning hair and a fat belly. Erich was given his charge sheet, which already had his 25 years at hard labor sentence written on it and signed by the judge. A group of perhaps 50 Russian civilians sat in the courtroom watching Soviet legal apparatus in action. When he heard his name called, Erich stepped up to the bench. "I want to know why I am charged with war crimes and the specific nature of the charges," said Erich. The judge looked at him beadily. "Yes, you are Hartmann, the Black Devil, the great pilot, yes? The big war criminal, yes?" "The great pilot, yes, perhaps. War criminal, no." The judge opened Erich's dossier and ran a blunt forefinger down an index. "From this," he said, "it is quite obvious that you are a war criminal." He went leafing through the dossier until he found what he was looking for. He looked up at Erich triumphantly. Charge 1. You participated in the illegal, brutal and unprovoked attack on the Soviet Union and destroyed a great quantity of Soviet war material, including at least 345 expensive Russian aircraft. The judge was warming to his administration of justice. Charge 2. In the central sector of the Russian front on 23 May 1943, you attacked a bread factory. Before your attack, the bakery was producing 16 tons of bread daily for the Soviet people. After your attack, the factory was able to produce only 1 ton of bread. The judge paused briefly to glare at Erich. Charge 3. In a village near Bryansk, you killed 780 Russian civilians, including women and children. Erich could no longer contain himself. Am I permitted to defend myself against these charges? The judge smiled icily. Of course, we are not fascists in Russia. We have justice here. I shot down Russian aircraft just as your pilots shot down German aircraft as a soldier of Germany. It was my duty. That is not a war crime. And what about the destruction of the bakery? The judge was gouging away abstractedly at his fingernails. Erich shook his head in incredulity, but continued his defense. I never shot at or in any way attacked any bread factory. Where was the building located? The judge gave a bored sigh. He scrabbled briefly in the dossier. In a village near Smolensk, he said. But that is nowhere near where I served. That was in the area defended by Fighter Wing 54. I was with Fighter Wing 52 on the southern sector of the front. The judge nodded knowingly. Yes, oh yes, all the war criminals were somewhere else when the crimes were committed. Or so they say. Erich stubbornly continued his defense. Charge 3 is absolutely false. I never killed any Russian civilians, let alone children. How can you be so sure of the exact number anyway? I was never near Bryansk. How can you possibly accuse me of slaughtering Russian civilians on such a scale? The slab-faced judge plunged again into the dossier. We don't just accuse you, Hartmann, we prove you did it. We have justice here. Under the Soviet system of justice, there are no innocent people in our jails. Well then, prove to me how I killed 780 civilians. I engaged only in aerial combat against other armed aircraft, manned by your soldiers. The judge twisted a little in his seat. He picked up his gavel and waved it at the Russian civilians sitting in the room. Take these people out, clear the court. They've seen enough of these war criminals. The judge pored over the dossier again, while the guards herded the Russian spectators out the door. When they had left, the judge looked up, ready to proceed. Now, Hartmann, do you know how many rounds of ammunition your Me-109 fighter carried? No, not exactly. About 300 rounds for each of the 2 machine guns and about 150 rounds for the 20mm cannon. The judge was now reading from the dossier. With the 1120 rounds of ammunition carried in his aircraft, Major Hartmann did therefore brutally murder 780 innocent Russian civilians. Erich broke in on the absurd recital. But I fired only at Russian aircraft in the air, don't you understand that? The judge nodded. I do understand that. I understand perfectly, but you don't seem to understand that when you fired your guns, all the bullets did not go into the other aircraft. They fell to the ground. There, they killed our innocent civilian people. 780 of them. You see how easy it is to prove that you are a war criminal? Erich smiled resignedly at the sheer nonsense of the proceeding. The judge burst out laughing. He threw his head back and roared, his double chin jumping like jelly. Suddenly sobering, he pointed a finger at the Blond Knight. Don't you know this whole thing is political, Hartmann? Why do you think I sent these people out of the court? You're trying to defend yourself in a situation that is impossible. Now then, you are an intelligent man. We have orders here from Moscow concerning you. You sign the papers we give you, and you can go out to the west, now to your family. And then what? We will help you to advance very quickly in West Germany. Later on, we will contact you, but we will do this only if we have you in the right position. Our influence in the West German government is very substantial. And if I don't? If you don't work with us, then you will never get out of here. You offer me a strange alternative. If I sign your paper, you have the means in your hands to get me jailed or shot in my own country by my own people. If I don't sign, you keep me in jail here. You understand completely. The judge drummed on his desk with his stubby fingers, waiting for his answer. I will not sign your paper now or ever. I demand that you shoot me down now. I am not afraid to die, and I want a bullet. The judge's face went as dark as that of an inquisitor turning a thumbscrew. He crashed his gavel down savagely. War criminal! 25 years hard labor! Take him away! And with that, the Blond Knight sank further into the power of his tormentors. Weeks later, local newspaper in the Stuttgart area carried reports of Erich Hartmann's sentencing as a war criminal. Usch's mother found her dark-haired daughter brooding over the newspaper. A wartime photograph of Erich in his flying jacket with his diamonds decoration neatly airbrushed out smiled out from amongst the black type. Frau Petsch had been dreading the moment when Usch would read the story. Putting her arm tenderly around her daughter, Frau Petsch sought to comfort her. Usch gave a sad, Madonna-like smile. I'll wait for him, mother. I'll wait. But Usch, 25 years, my dear. Your Erich will be more than 60 years old. If they keep him that long, that's how old he will be. They may keep him until he is 70, but when he comes home, I will be waiting. Such was the love that reached out to Erich in bondage. They still have not given up in trying to break our man. First its isolation, which is broken via hunger strike, then its sweet-talking and job offerings in East Germany, and when all of this fails, they simply put him in front of a kangaroo court, where the judge is surprisingly candid and sentence him to 25 years of hard labor. But I have to say, arguing that the ammo he fired in the air killed people on the ground was a big-brained move because you can neither prove or disprove it. And in the eyes of the Soviets, it satisfied their need for progressive justice. Either way, Erich now has to face hard time as a common criminal and not a POW. But you know him by now, it won't stop him from standing by his values. And all that after he almost starved to death. See you next time. Cheers.